Welcome to the Medical 3D Players podcast. We're coming to you live from Materialise headquarters in Belgium to talk about mass personalization. We're your hosts, Peter Slagmolen and Sebastian de Boot, and we'll be delving into key developments in medical 3D technology by examining new and surprising dimensions with experts across the industry. If you're ready to change the world with us, please stay tuned and subscribe to our channel.
Face transplants sound like they only benefit one person, being the person who gets the treatment. But today we'll speak to our guest, Alyssa Glennon, clinical engineer at Materialise, and we'll learn about the key insights and discoveries that benefit many areas of personalized care.
Hi Alyssa, you're a clinical engineer in our US office. I've been with Materialise for 8 years, and in your role have planned hundreds of complex orthopedic reconstruction cases in both upper and lower extremities. You've been involved in 4 face transplants, which is basically as many as the most experienced surgical team in the world. You're involved in pretty much all the cool stuff that we're doing at Materialise from our US office, including also the personalization things at the point of care that we're working on. And thanks for being part of this podcast.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
We're definitely very interested to hear your thoughts about mass personalization, but can't dive straight into that without having talked about the double hand and face transplant case, which you've been recently involved in, which got a lot of exposure. And maybe just take us to the beginning. Like, how did you actually get involved in that particular case?
The lead surgeon at NYU, he had worked with us previously on face transplants. He's a craniomaxillofacial physician. And when he had this patient come to him with this unique need, he said, let's give Materialise a call. And when he first reached out, we actually thought it was just a double hand transplant. And that's when I got involved because I had some experience doing hand transplants. And then we come to find out a few weeks later that he meant both. So he had some experience with patient-specific planning, both for more routine cases and also for the complex face transplants. So it was a nice fit, I think, from the beginning.
I'm assuming that when it comes to this case, it is more complex. Is it actually more complex than anything you've done before? And what makes it more complex, in particularly the procedure as a whole?
Transplants are, of course, more complex than a more routine procedure. This one wasn't necessarily any more complex than a different hand transplant that I might have worked on. What makes it more complicated are all the moving parts. There's a team of physicians basically at every kind of surgical station for the case. So there's one at each hand, there's one at the face, and then there's the same on the donor as well. So we have 6 surgical teams. So there's a lot of physicians in the room at any one time. And those are just the acting surgeons, right? There's anesthesia and support personnel and OR staff. So it's a full house. And making sure that everyone's kind of on the same page with the procedure, understanding everyone's objectives, their preferences, trying to incorporate all of that into our designs, into our process. That's, I think, the most complicated factor. Even just meeting with everyone, right, and explaining what the process is going to be and taking questions is difficult to get everyone in the same room at the same time. So I think the logistics of a case like this are what make it so complicated.
I guess it also takes quite a lot of time ahead of surgery. Well, assuming here that it's still, you rely on a donor being available at some point in time, and then things need to happen, but assuming that that's not the moment when you start planning, right? How much time in advance you actually start, and what are some of the things that you do actually upfront versus when the donor is available?
Yeah, certainly it's a lengthy process. We were first made aware of the case in spring of 2019, spring, early summer, and we had planned to kind of start rehearsing early summer of 2019. So June timeframe, we started with cadaver labs. So the surgical team planned to do a cadaver lab once every 5 or 6 weeks or so. And we were going to plan as if that was the actual case. So we did that for several months, I think 5 or 6 times, before they actually even said, okay, now we're ready enough so that if there is a donor that becomes available, we can do this surgery. And so they listed the patient on the transplant list after about 5 or 6 months. He was a very rare transplant patient in that there were very few percentage of donors that could work for him given his blood protein profiles. So they wanted to kind of get him on the list as early as possible, knowing that there would likely be a wait period. I think surgery was almost a full year after he was listed on the transplant list. So we had 6, 7 more rehearsals afterwards just to continue to refine these skills, make sure the designs were all, crisp, make sure the surgical team knew where to be at any given time, like an orchestra in the OR, trying to make sure that even how people moved through the operating room was important given how crowded they were. So every practice was definitely worth it, but it was probably a year and a half long.
That's impressive. 12, 13 times that you got together and went through the
Yes.
rehearsal. Wow. And is it then
Yep.
with this entire team then, or how does that work?
Yeah, so the first few were done in a cadaver lab type setting. It was a lab at NYU, so it wasn't an official operating room or anything like that. It was really just to kind of work out the nuts and bolts of what needed to happen. After probably 3 or 4 like that, they moved to the operating room, and that was specifically to practice that movement between the ORs. With it being so crowded and with there being so many moving parts, they wanted to make sure that all the instrumentation was placed in an efficient way, that everyone could get to the things that they needed to get to at any given time, that the surgeons knew what their rotation was going to be throughout the procedure. It was a 20-hour surgery.
And during that process, were there then really times where, well, you and the team and people like really discovered like things that you thought were going to work that was like, it's not working at all, need to go back to the drawing board? Do you have some of those examples maybe just on things that you thought was going to work?
So with previous hand transplants, when you're just doing a hand, you're looking for a donor that has hands that are of a similar size to the patient that is going to receive them. So you can do a lot of upfront analysis on sort of envelope of the size of those hands is going to be. When you're doing a hand and face transplant, especially on a patient who likely wasn't going to have a lot of options for matches from a donor, you don't have as much luxury to kind of pick and choose. So one of the things that we realized pretty early on was that if the blood profiles worked, we were going to move forward with this patient regardless of size difference between the donor and the recipient. So for us, making patient-specific instrumentation, that added this extra level of challenge because we were used to sort of almost one-to-one matching. And when we had this potential for large size differences, we found out pretty quickly through cadavers that had very different size differences that wasn't going to work. And so we had to basically do a small, medium, and large design for our hand guides so that at the time of surgery, whichever size of donor became available, we could still accommodate. So we used the first half of the labs or so to specifically find very differently sized cadavers who were representing the donor and the recipient to practice what that might look like and to try to kind of pinpoint what our size range was going to be and what those differences might actually look like. There's not a lot of data on distance between arm bones on the greater population, for example. So it was a challenge to kind of build that data through the labs and then find these size ranges and then incorporate that in all of our subsequent designs so that we were prepared for any opportunity.
So it sounds like it's not just really planning for it, it's really developing the procedure in the year before it actually happens.
Yep, definitely a part of it.
So it is probably the most complex thing that you've ever been involved in then, I'm assuming, or...
Each guide, that's a procedure that we're very comfortable with and have done many, many times before, but adding that level of unknown and needing to have all these different options available for each case, each cadaver lab, each false alarm kind of case was important. So certainly all the extra parts definitely added to the complexity.
Can you give us an idea on how many parts, like 3D printed patient-specific parts that actually you needed or that you had available?
And so for the hands, we had 3 sizes of guides for the donor and 3 for the recipient. And that was for each arm, so double that. And then we had some kind of accessory pieces that we had 3D printed as well that worked for the physician team. We had some identification tags that they used to label various pieces of the anatomy during surgery so that they would remember what was what and could quickly reattach them once the transplant occurred. And there were, I think, 6 sort of trees that contained many of these little tags on them. And then we also had some splints, basically soft tissue splints, a way to position the wrist in a certain degree of flexion, a certain degree of extension, so that they could make sure that the muscles were at the right tension to accomplish the full range of motion afterwards. So probably close to 20 printed pieces, maybe just for the hands alone. That's excluding the face. And I think over the course of the 13 or so labs that we supported, I think we 3D printed probably 400 parts combined, hand and face, to work out these designs, to have parts available for the rehearsal and all the different revisions and duplicates that we had to do as well.
One thing that's puzzling me, Alyssa, is that we talk about a face transplant, which to me feels like a soft tissue procedure. We're changing the face of a person. And you talk a lot about guides. I associate that with a bony tissue procedure. How do those two match? How do the guides come into a soft tissue procedure?
Primarily our focus was on the bony part of the procedure. So that was pretty kind of bread and butter for us. From the face side, you're right, there is quite a bit of soft tissue that's transplanted. That's really the main objective. And what we did with the guides is the bone underneath the soft tissue is used as the anchor points. We very strategically located these anchor points that the physician selected for the soft tissue to be transplanted. So there's, for example, points on the temple where you might have the soft tissue kind of connect. We helped them locate these very thin slices of bone that they could use to help actually transplant that tissue and then have it readhere. So you need something to kind of get the skin to reattach to the bony anatomy. And we do that by keeping this anchor of bone with the skin as it's transplanted.
The guides basically serve as a way to identify where the Velcro is going to be that will allow you to attach it
Yes,
back.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. Nice.
The way that you're explaining it, it seems like you're not just executing instructions from the surgeon in preparation. From your experience, also giving a lot of input and guidance to the surgical team then, how to use patient-specific 3D printed technology.
So the benefit of us having done previous hand and face transplants is, we've have lessons learned from all of those. So it was nice. My experience for hand transplants had come from a different institution. So it was helpful for me to bring some of that information to the NYU team and just kind of let them know what we had done previously. We also learned a lot with this NYU team. The identification tags I mentioned, that's the first time we've ever done that. It was helpful to have some of that experience and to use that to kind of reassure the physicians and give them a little bit of confidence that, these guides have been used in this type of case before. They've been used successfully several times. We can help you, but we also need to continue to work with you to make sure that we accomplish what your goals are for this specific patient. And so, of course, modifications are made every time.
I think confidence here is probably a good word, especially when you're doing something like that for the first time. It's such a big team. In those rehearsal sessions, was there any moment, any session where the team was like, it's just too complicated, it's never going to work? Or was it always like, okay, we still need to hash out some things, but we'll get there?
One of the things the NYU team was great about was maintaining this kind of optimism, this sense of confidence. I don't think they ever wavered in their confidence for doing the case, for the complexity of the case. I think they frequently questioned decisions, process, steps. They wanted to make sure that they were doing it right step by step from the beginning to the end of the procedure. And the guides came into question, everything came into question at one point or another. And the physicians ultimately evaluated each step and made sure that they selected the best method for them moving forward. I mentioned all the different surgeons involved and all the different preferences involved. I think some of them maybe took some winning over others, depending on the specific item they were debating. But in the end, they were very good about really unifying around decisions and moving forward with them.
I mean, you're prepared in the planning of this, and obviously it's a face transplant as well, so there's an aesthetic aspect to it. What are kind of the risks that we can, or that you as an engineer can help manage somehow through that planning for the patient?
So on our craniomaxillofacial side, we can do a little bit of soft tissue simulation. So the benefit there, as you mentioned, some aesthetics for the face. You can sort of estimate, and I say sort of because, of course, everything changes in the OR, but you can give yourself kind of an idea of how things will look. You can see when you transplant the chin, do we make it too big? Is it too small? You can make fine adjustments like that. When we do the hands, we can control things like length. We can make sure that the final limb length is reasonable for this patient's size. We can look at things like range of motion, try to make sure that we're getting as functional as possible with our results. So there's certainly some simulation and estimation that we can do to help give the surgeons an idea of where they're going in the end. It's not probably exact to what happens intraoperatively, but again, just gives them just a little bit more information to go off of so that they know where their target is in the OR.
Pretty impressive. Maybe, Alyssa, if you could take us through the day itself, D-Day. I imagine it, you're working in your garden or something, and then the phone rings. Alyssa, we need you at the office. What were you doing? Is it like that? Like, do you get the call, and is that something that you're then waiting for? And what were you doing at that moment?
We got an email in the evening, on a Monday evening, right around 6 p.m. So just after kind of the workday had finished. It was a one-liner from the head surgeon at NYU, and it just said, "It's go time." And so we all were suddenly on call and prepared for this case to happen. The interesting thing about the surgery is from the hands perspective, we had already designed a product that was intended to fit any size donor. I mentioned the small, medium, large sizes before. So that product was already in New York waiting. But for the CMF side, for the face part, that was intended to be donor specific. So once we knew that the case was live, the CMF team was on overdrive, basically to receive images from NYU quickly that night. I think we received them in the middle of the night after we got that email. We processed them between then and dawn, basically the next day. Our CMF clinical engineer met with the NYU team early that next morning. We had guides designed by lunchtime that next day. And that evening, they were printed, they came off the machines, and then a CMF clinical engineer and myself grabbed them off the machines, drove as quickly as we could to the Detroit airport, and flew them to New York in time for surgery the following morning. So it was kind of a crazy time crunch situation, but we were well prepared. We had global teams ready kind of round the clock. Everyone had a set schedule so that if, in fact, the images did come in the middle of the night, which of course they did, we were prepared and we were able to process them and get everything moving in time so that we could hand carry the rest of the product to New York just in time.
Yeah, what a logistical machine this is.
Yeah, exactly. What puzzles me is, you have tens of people involved on the engineering side. You have a lot of a huge team on the surgical side involved. How do you make sure that what you deliver, what you bring to the table in the end is ready, is there, that the quality is high? Do you have systems to do that? Or how do you make sure that what you, in the end, take in a box with you on the airplane is going to be exactly what's needed at that point in time? How do you manage that?
Well, the good news is we had quite a bit of practice, right? So we had done this 12, 13 times before. Obviously, a little less maybe pressure those times, knowing that it was a cadaver lab, but the process was identical. Mm-hmm. So we were comfortable with moving through what we would need to do to accomplish this. We do have pretty robust quality systems to make sure that the product that we deliver is ultimately exactly what we intend it to be. We have checks throughout the entire process, including the final parts that come off the machines. And while it was a little tight there between everything getting off the machine and us making our flight to New York, we didn't skip steps, we didn't cut corners. We made sure that every product that came off that machine had been inspected, had been cleaned, had been packaged appropriately. And then we were very carefully hand carrying them to New York to make sure that everything stayed intact and everything was kept together so that they had everything that they would need. And it was very easily labeled, clearly defined, and ready to be used right away.
And so you also jumped on that plane together with the parts and ultimately also helped in the OR, or how's that work?
Yes, the face parts came with us on the plane. We brought them to New York and they were sterilized right away and used in that actual surgery. The hand parts we had delivered a few weeks prior, so those had been already on the shelf. We actually had a hardware rep who was on the ground in New York who was very familiar with our products as well. He was not a materialized rep, but we had been working together for so long. He had kind of been keeping tabs on all of the hand parts that had been arriving and kind of sorting through them and making sure that NYU knew what was what and kind of positioned them appropriately in the OR. And then once Emily, the other engineer, and I got there, we helped, again, kind of sort through all the products, make sure things were lined up in terms of when they would need to use each part throughout the case. And then we're ready to answer questions and make sure everything that they needed was there and available.
How do you go personally through such a day? Like, I'm assuming it's like a huge adrenaline rush throughout. Like, what's the moment when, okay, it's going to be fine. Our job's done here. It's out of our hands and we did a good job. Like, is that when you enter the OR? Is that after the procedure or,
Actually, all of the kind of tension I realized hadn't really been released until the press release at NYU gave, with the patient actually there showing off his face and his hands. So there's definitely kind of a sigh of relief right after the surgery when we left the OR, saying, yeah, everything worked. We were going really fast. They were making great time. It was perfect. But not until we actually saw the patient months later did I really feel like, okay, we did it. Everything worked out like it was supposed to. It's definitely an adrenaline rush at the time. Not a lot of sleep for a couple of days there, even if you wanted to. But it wasn't until we saw the patient just a few months ago that I really felt like, okay, we know it worked.
Yeah, and that's probably because we're engineers here all on the call that we didn't even talk about is the patient. But it's impressive to see the technical part, but I can totally imagine that it's when you see the actual patient that's really the moment of like, oh yeah, this is, the accomplishment. Do you have any reaction from the patient? Have you ever met him?
I've seen him a couple of times. I've not met him, shaking his hand or anything like that. But typically that's not something that we would do as engineers, kind of more background personnel, I suppose, technical support for the case. We do hear updates from the physician team, how things are going. They were pretty tight-lipped about this case, of course, because of the kind of unique nature of it. But we did get periodic updates that he had been doing well in rehab, that his physical therapy was going very well, that he was, being released from the hospital earlier than anticipated for extended physical therapy at home. Some seeds, I suppose, being dropped for us so that we weren't sort of left in the lurch there wondering. But I think in seeing him, I think the biggest impact for me is, even if the surgery went well, there's always extra factors afterwards that you worry about. Did the organs end up getting rejected? Did the immunosuppressant drugs, work as they were supposed to? Is there too much skin? Is the limb length okay? There's all these other factors that you wonder about, and it's not until you actually, you see the patient. I saw one of my favorite photos of him was he was playing pool, and that kind of, fine motor skill that you need in your hands to be able to play a game like pool. It's just so rewarding, I think, for me to see that not only does he have hands, but he can use them so well, so quickly. Great photo to see.
Yeah, it's something that I don't even master before having had a double hand transplant. Alyssa, that's just amazing. I think it's fantastic to hear. I mean, we both in external media, but also within Materialize, I think this case got quite some exposure and quite some interest. So it's highly motivational. And even now, I mean, you constantly mention things that still blow me away. So I think it's really nice for you to share it.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the things that we do want to talk about after looking at the complexity, the immense logistical operation behind such a complex case is, how does this relate more to the topic of this podcast, basically, which is more mass personalization, right? The scalability of it. My first impressions after hearing your story is that being involved in the surgery, being there with a team of engineers, doing several cadaver labs, I would assume that's not common, right? That's not how you would typically handle a case, right?
That's true. Sometimes for first-time users, we will have a clinical engineer available, especially if the case is more complicated. But certainly we don't really do cadaver rehearsals or things like that for more standard cases.
But there are always skeptical people around this, right? Some might say that we're putting in a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort of very, very highly helped or skilled people to help one patient, basically. If we use those resources, we could easily help hundreds of other patients somehow, and that are maybe less spectacular, but are also in need or in pain or have something that I would like help with. How do you reflect, maybe if you look at what you're doing for this case or what this case means, how do you reflect on what it means for the broader society as a whole?
I will preface it by saying we don't do this case to the exclusion of others. So certainly we have whole teams of engineers available who are supporting all the cases that come in to Materialize. So while I agree that there are a lot of resources put towards this case, we certainly didn't exclude any other surgeries just to be able to accomplish that. But really, to answer your question more directly, I had a similar thought when the case was first presented to us. At first, I was a bit apprehensive. Why do we need to do this case that's so complicated? Why can't we just do hands and then later do a face, or vice versa? Why do we need to spend all this extra effort? And I think what ultimately won me over was this idea that medicine is always progressing. and we're always looking for ways to be better, right? And that's true, across society. And so this case was probably going to happen sometime. And I feel strongly that the technology that we provide adds value to these types of cases. So bringing this technology, allowing it to help this one patient, even though it was highly focused expertise from many, many people to do it, I think it trickles down, right? So we're helping expand the awareness of the technology, right? So the press that this particular patient got and NYU received, right? That helps more people understand that this type of technology is available, and it's available for complicated cases, and it's available for more straightforward cases. I don't think that this technology adds value only for cases like double hand and face transplants. I think it helps for every patient. We've shown that it saves time in the OR. You can reduce anesthesia. You can reduce revision rates. There's lots of benefits for applying this type of technology to various cases. And I think expanding that awareness is a really big benefit of doing these high profile cases. And then with that is all the lessons that we learned from it, right? We did those identification tags. We added some 3D printed splints. We're changing designs, offering different sizes for guides. We're making modifications to better meet our surgeons' needs, our patients' needs. And those also trickle down, right? That technology gets expanded and broadened, and everything we learn from every case, we can apply to every other case down the road. It's kind of multifaceted benefit, but there's never, I don't think, anything wrong with progress, right? Even if it looks like it's going in one specific direction, there's always this trickle down effect that benefits all these other patients as well.
Your job has also changed over the past 10 years, that as we started doing these cases 10 years ago, that on a day-to-day basis, we found ways to do those more efficiently or entirely differently than we do today. What are, according to you, some of the more, I would say, radical improvements that you've seen in how you could handle such a case over the past years?
When I started almost 10 years ago now, the cases that I learned on when I started, they were, I want to say, fairly standard. They were not very complex. They seemed to be quite straightforward. The case reports that we would send with them, kind of detailing the nitty gritty of each case and all the decision making that went through it, they were small and trim and had a few photos or a few screenshots, and that's about it. Today, the vast majority of the cases that we process are very complicated. They are patients who have had problems maybe since birth, and so their forearm anatomy was never normal. Whereas before it was kind of, someone had a normal forearm, broke it didn't heal quite right, and now we're just trying to restore it to how it was. But now we're doing cases where there was no normal. There's just all these extra confounding factors that make the cases so complicated. Our case reports today, from being previously maybe 5 or 6 pages, could be upwards of 25, 30 pages, detailing all these little steps. And we've been able to, while increasing the complexity of these cases, also get faster at processing them. We're doing significantly higher volume of cases than we were doing when I started, and they're significantly more complex as well. So our learning curve, I think, is quite steep, and we've really taken advantage of that and applied that to all of our cases moving forward.
You're also, very much involved in anything this entire shift that's now been happening on things moving to the point of care, Alyssa, and where today more and more hospitals are doing 3D printing in-house, maybe even doing some of those more easy, it's never easy, but simpler cases in the hospital. What's your explanation for this shift? It used to be a bit the ownership of companies to do those kinds of things, and rapidly shifting to things happening in hospitals. What causes that, actually?
The more obvious one is probably time savings, right? When you have a printer on site, if it's the floor below you or down the street or down the hall, you have this advantage of being able to print, take it off the machine, clean it up, and use it right away. There's no shipping, there's no packaging, there's none of that. So you're taking out some of the steps when you order it from a manufacturer like us. The other benefit is you're less limited by what you can do. So This case that we talked about, the hand and face transplant, right? There were some features of this that were unique for this case. And we had to work extensively with the surgeons back and forth. It took months. We had many, many meetings discussing it, including all of the rehearsals that we did. When you can do all that live on the spot and you can prototype and you can iterate, I think there are advantages there. And you're not limited by, say, what the Materialize processes are. So if you wanted to do a case type that maybe Materialize doesn't support, you would have those tools available for you at the point of care that you could use, that you have no constraints, not in the same way anyway that Materialize might have. So I think the time savings is a big one, the accessibility, and that advantage of fewer restrictions in some ways.
Maybe say then that the fact that it's within the walls of the hospital, do you see that this causes an acceleration in the adoption of technology itself? Because the end user and the engineer are basically just an office away from each other. Is that what's happening at all? Or?
Yeah, I think we have seen an acceleration. And I think part of that also goes back to what we talked about before, is this awareness. When you're a surgeon and you walk down the hall and you can see a shelf of these pretty 3D printed parts of all these various anatomies, you might say, hey, that looks interesting, and pop in and ask about it and say, oh, I might try this. And when it seems so easy to try because the person right down the hall has the printer and can do it for you, there's much less barrier to entry, whereas otherwise they'd have to maybe search online, find Materialize, give us a call. There's more steps involved. And for busy physicians, that could be a hurdle as well. But when it's right there in front of you, I think, trying out new technology is always fun, right? So this gives them an opportunity to try it and see if it works for them and adds value. And ultimately, I think it does. And so, yeah, we see this acceleration and this expansion.
And the way point of care is also contributing to the availability of personalized solutions just because of it's there. It's top of mind, basically. It brings people in to these labs where there is a collaboration aspect. Yeah, I think it's indeed a great element that it can realize.
Yeah. See where we're heading for the coming years. One of the things that we have talked about in a previous session was the fact that personalized care is expensive, or at least costly compared to taking a standard implant, and some of those costs can be brought back to clinical engineering work. Put it out there. And obviously, what you did, and I think that the story that we started on face transplant show how invaluable the work is that you are. At the same time, we're trying to automate as much as possible. Is the job of a clinical engineer at risk? Is there a clinical engineer today? In 10 years, will you have to retire? How do you look at that?
I think there's always going to be a need for high levels of expertise for these types of cases. And maybe it comes to a point where it's only for double hand and face transplant type of cases, and a lot of the rest can be automated. But I think there's always going to be a need for unique engineering perspective on certain cases. There is a chance that the clinical engineer will move more to the point of care, and there'll be fewer options available from a service or manufacturing standpoint. But I don't think every hospital in the world is going to have 3D printing labs. I don't think that's really sustainable. I think you'll have major institutions that have them, sort of these regional centers, right, where a lot of patients who have complicated cases will be referred. And then you'll have smaller institutions that are capable of doing that case. They just need the support from the technology, and they'll be able to outsource to services like Materialize offers. So I don't think clinical engineering is going away. I think if anything, it will grow, at least first. And as automation comes out and sort of streamlining some of these processes, I think maybe some of the labor involved and some of the more upfront steps to these processes could move from the clinical engineer, but that just opens engineers up for other opportunities later on in the process. So looking at things like patient-matched implants or patient-specific implants, finding ways to streamline the surgery, adding maybe not patient-specific guides or implants, but maybe there are other tools that, like the identification tags that are not specific maybe to this one individual patient, but is a huge advantage for the surgical team, right? There are lots of optimizations that I'm sure can be made in the medical space where an engineer can be invaluable. So maybe there are some shifts over time, but I don't see that going away.
Totally agree. I mean, if you look at, we're technology enthusiasts, right? But me and Sebastian here, we're typically looking at what's next. And there as well, yeah, you talked about automation as something that will somehow change the role probably of a clinical engineer. If you look at some of the upcoming technologies that is being talked about a lot in this space, AI, things like AR and so on and so forth. What do you think will be most impactful in the coming years? What do you think will have the biggest or will drive the biggest change in the end for the healthcare systems forward? Do you have like a view on that?
I think today, the way it looks, it's going to be AI that makes the biggest difference. I think efficiency gains that are made possible by using AI algorithms are far and away the low-hanging fruit. I think there are technologies like AR, VR that are interesting and might prove to be very useful for more specific use cases. But from a kind of a broad standpoint, I see increasing efficiency through AI as the big benefit.
Yeah, totally agree. I think there's a lot to be gained. There's still things that can be automated through AI and also made smarter. So,
the other thing that AI enables is this accessibility, right? So right now there aren't a ton of engineers who are intimately familiar with imaging, for example. I was just on a call actually earlier this week where an institution was talking about the challenges they have with hiring personnel at the point of care, because a lot of the engineers who come are very tech savvy, but maybe have never looked at a medical image before. So kind of training them to read images is complicated. Having this AI, right now, a lot of the focus is on the first steps of segmentation and kind of translating these medical images into something that an engineer is maybe more familiar with, into a CAD part, for example. Having AI take part of that step is going to also help increase accessibility for these point of care institutions. So it all kind of flows together, but our ultimate goal is to make this as available to as many people and cases as possible. And I think the AI is really going to be a big focus for that.
Alyssa, it was an absolute pleasure of having you here today, talking to us about face transplants and your expertise as a clinical engineer. It's really insightful, hopefully also to our audience on mass personalization. So thanks a lot for being here.
My pleasure, definitely.
Thanks a lot. And that concludes our episode of today.
Yeah, sure. Make sure to subscribe to our channel, follow the next episodes of the podcast, and happy to continue the conversations, Guy.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Stay tuned.